This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with Michael Bungay Stanier, and we talk about online learning, the best coaching question in the world, and getting focused. Enjoy this episode. Hey there, it's James Taylor, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Michael Bungay Stanier. Michael is the senior partner of Box of Crayons, a company that helps organizations do less good work and more great work. Box of Crayons is best known for its coaching programs, which give busy managers practical tools so they can coach in 10 minutes or less. On the way to founding Box of Crayons in 2002, Michael lived in Australia, England, the United States, and Canada, which is his current home. He's written 2 books, have each sold close to 100,000 copies, the Wall Street Journal bestseller The Coaching Habit, and Do More Great Work. He was the first Canadian Coach of the Year, is a Rhodes Scholar, and in 2016 was recognized as the number 2 coaching guru in the world. And it's my great pleasure to have Michael join us today. So welcome, Michael.
Gosh, I'm exhausted just listening to that introduction. I mean, I know that's the introduction I sent you to read, but I'm like, I need to rewrite that introduction. So it's not quite as many medals jingling. It misses out all the interesting, messy parts of my life.
Well, that's what introductions are for. That's
right.
That's the purpose of them as well. But I mean, it is a pretty amazing CV, the work that you've done as well. But first of all, talk to us. What's going on in your world just now? What are the current projects that have your focus?
Well, the book, The Coaching Habit, which I know is part of the reasons we connected, it came out about a year and a half ago, a little less now. And actually, it's going gangbusters. It's closing in on 250,000 copies sold, which is fantastic and so beyond my expectations of the book. It's even self-published, so I was really not expecting this. And what's fantastic and great fun is that it's actually changed our business. It's really pretty much doubled the size of our business. So a big part of what I'm up to, James, is just coping with that, because I'm trying to grow the business in a way that is useful and doesn't try and build out a huge thing that will then crumble when no other work shows up, but also not try and run it on a shoestring so that we all die of overwork. And then go, how do I build on the success of the book in a way that is useful and exciting and interesting for me? So as well as that whole piece of trying to be a grown-up CEO and manage and grow a business, we're building out an app, which I'm pretty excited about, to try and hopefully not end up in the graveyard of all the other useless apps that have been created, but to actually build an app that helps people be more coach-like in the way that they behave and show up on their day-to-day work.
And that time, in any person that has some success or business has success, there's more inbound coming that you can possibly deal with, and there's more opportunities you can possibly deal with. What is your kind of rule in terms of being able to assess those various opportunities that come into you? Do you have a regular kind of planning? You focus on the mission or the values of the business? What's your way of sorting and sifting all of that?
Well, that's a really good question, and there's a number of ways to do it. The primary one, and this has been the most successful, is to remove me from actually doing this, because I'm terrible. I have no taste. That's what's clear. That's unfair. But I get excited. I suffer from what's known as the shiny object syndrome. So I get really excited when all sorts of things come along and knock on the door. And one of the best things that we've done is to actually hire somebody to be our inbound salesperson, so dealing with inquiries. And Shannon is amazing. She actually worked behind the bar at my favorite pizzeria, and we happened to connect, and I went, come and help me out with this. And she's turned into a fully fledged, brilliant salesperson. And so she has a series of criteria about what we're looking for the best fit for our business. And we're a training company, and most of our programs are actually delivered not by me, but by a faculty of trainers. And then another criteria of what I might do. And so, my time is limited, and at its best is actually spent dreaming up new ideas and trying to be visionary for what the company is about. So it's not a great use of my time to spend all my time on the road, giving keynotes or running workshops or whatever it might be.
On that point, so it's almost like you're kind of separating out the two things. There's the business, which is kind of building us doing, and then there's you as the kind of the figurehead, and there's the kind of chief evangelist.
Yeah, and when we started this, Box of Crayons and Michael were the same. It was me, and I was doing everything. And when somebody said I'd like to hire Box of Crayons, they meant I'd like to hire Michael, and I understood that, and they understood it. Now we're a little larger. We actually have to separate that out. And so we have to be more thoughtful about, so when will we send Michael in? And, we send Michael in if they kind of tick 4 out of 5 of these boxes. It's a cool company or an organization. They can pay my fee. It can open up a strategic opportunity in that organization, and it's somewhere cool. So maybe what's that, 4 factors? And I think probably we look for at least 2 and sometimes 3 of those factors. And if they've got all of those, then we're interested.
We're looking for a Tesla event in Bali.
Exactly. Yeah. So that, I'm up for that. There's a conference coming up in September. It's the Teaching, Learning, Coaching Conference. It's about how does coaching show up in education. And I would love to figure that out, because I would love our education systems, wherever you are in the world, to elevate, to get a little better. So I was like, you know what? I'm up for that. It's in Indianapolis. That's probably not the coolest city I've been in, but it's going to be a really great conference. So that's kind of how it blows with me. So
obviously you're known as a coach and the coach of now other coaches in terms of empowering other people as well. But where did you first learn your craft as a coach?
Well, there are a couple of milestones around it. Officially, I finally, after a lifetime of moving around, grew up in Australia, lived in England for a while, lived in Boston for a while, eventually settled in Toronto 16 years ago. I did my official coach training 16 or 17 years ago when I first moved here to Toronto. But actually, the real story starts, way back when. As a young man, as a teenager, I was always pretty good at being the guy who listened to my other friends and their angsty teenage life. It was like everyone's got an angsty teenage life. And I'd be good at sitting in the car at 2 o'clock in the morning, hearing somebody talk about how hard life was and how nobody loved them and all that sort of stuff. And even then I was like, I'm good at listening, but I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm wondering if there's something better I could be doing. And when I got to university, I actually did crisis telephone counseling. So I was on a kind of suicide hotline for youth. And that was actually the first formal training I got in listening and asking questions and being not just a good ear, but a little more active and a little more proactive than that. And I did that in Australia. And then when I moved to England and studied in England, I did that there as well. And it was while I started working in England that I first started noticing the rise of coaching. So this is like in the early 90s. And quite clearly it was a weird Californian thing. It's like, Californian. Okay. So because I'm in England at the time, you're skeptical about things American, particularly things West Coast American. So I was like, well, on the one hand, I'm skeptical. On the other hand, that actually kind of looks interesting. And then when I moved to the States, I actually hired my first coach. I went, okay, let's find out what this is about. And whilst I wouldn't say that she was a brilliant coach, it certainly gave me an insight as to what that was, what the process was, what I already knew, what I didn't know. And that was when I started talking to my clients at the time, using the language of coaching. And then shortly after that, did my formal training, launched my coaching practice, discovered, annoyingly, but thankfully, I didn't actually enjoy coaching a lot of people that much. I really thought that was going to be the business, but turns out that's not enough for me. I didn't get as fulfilled doing that as I thought. And that's what set me off along the path of actually becoming the head of a training company that trains managers to be better coaches.
So what was it you didn't, a couple of my friends are very good coaches, and my coaches as well, I often hear that they can feel a little bit burnt out on the coaching, especially the one-on-one phone coaching that they're doing as well. It's an amazing skill to have to be able to be that person. But obviously it's not for everyone. So what was it the sheer amount of people you were having to deal with in that kind of way and going to that kind of depth with them, or was it something else?
It's shallower than that. It was, I got bored. I got bored listening to people, and I got bored going through the same conversations with people again and again. And I also, like, I'm a show off. I like being on stage. I like being in front of people, and I missed that part of the mix. So I love it when I have a chance to coach people in a kind of one-off or an ad hoc way. But that whole idea of show up again in 2 weeks and we'll have another conversation, and we'll do that every 2 weeks for the next 3 or 6 or 9 or 12 months. Turns out that I'm not patient enough or nice enough to do that. So that was really useful. I mean, I've had a coach. Ernest has been my coach for 8 or 9 years, so I buy into the value of coaching. It just turns out that that's not the thing I do the best.
So the organizations you work with, you actually kind of go in and help managers and leaders in those organizations be coaches in their organizations, like internal coaches. Right. What are the biggest challenges that those managers and leaders have when having to manage other people in their teams and having to coach other people in their teams?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the starting point is to make coaching feel less weird to most people, because the challenge when you talk to people like me or other people like HR people who love coaching is we're like, coaching is awesome. And when you talk to most normal people, most managers, most leaders, they're like, I'm not against coaching, but I don't want to be a coach. I actually just want to be an effective manager, an effective leader, and I want my team to do okay, and I want me to do okay, and I want to go home and see my family at the end of the day. And for them, coaching feels like a bit of a HR initiative or a bit of a burden. So the first thing to do is reframe this experience as going, look, we're not turning you into coaches. We want you to be who you are, but to be a bit more coach-like, which really just says, can you stay curious a little bit longer? Can you rush to action and advice giving just a little bit slower? And then it's to say to them, look, this isn't about adding to what you've already trying to do, because there's nobody who's not overworked and overwhelmed at the moment. So when you say to them, hey, good news, coaching is going to add an extra chunk of work to what you're already doing, they are like, well, I appreciate that, but that's never going to happen. So it's about explaining that what we're looking to do is transforming what they currently do. So rather than adding to it, it's about changing what's already there. And then the final piece is to say, look, and you can do this really fast. You can coach in 10 minutes or less. In fact, if you can't coach in 10 minutes or less, you probably don't have time to coach. So it's about removing that anxiety about this is going to suck my life away.
So when the people that you're working, maybe they're in sales department, or they're in something maybe it's not HR, not something you traditionally think of as the kind of coaching part of, or there's a lot of people there that really love the kind of coaching thing. What is their 2 a.m. problem? What is the thing that keeps them awake at night that coaching can really help them with?
Well, here's the promise we try to make people, which solves assorted variations of a 2 a.m. problem. And the promise we say is, what if I could show you how to work less hard but have more impact? And that gets people interested. And what's brilliant about what you're putting your finger on, James, is so many people, when they talk about coaching, they talk about it as the outcome, whereas coaching is just a process to get somewhere. It's like, okay, so what's in it for me to make my life better? And part of what you can see is that when people are being more coach-like, it actually slows down their rush to jump in, fix things, solve things, take responsibility for things. And actually what they start noticing is when they stop doing that, actually they have less on their plate. They become less of a bottleneck to their own team. They do a better job at empowering those people around them, so they take more, so that the people they're leading become more confident and more competent and more autonomous and more self-sufficient. So they're able to do more without having to have their hands held as they go through the process. So they just become a more effective team, happier people, more engaged. But you as the leader get to actually work a little less hard, but help people stay focused on the stuff that really matters.
And you obviously train in different parts of the world. You've worked in different parts of the world. I think some of myself, I've worked in California, Silicon Valley, and they're very open to this kind of area. Other parts of the world, not so much. The kind of style of management is a very top-down, dictatorial kind of style.
Right.
When you come up against those organizations, maybe it's the senior leadership, they recognize that they need to change. There needs to be a culture change there. But the middle management that you're having to work with, they're culturally they're not coming from that place. How do you begin about kind of just kind of changing that mindset to maybe people are a little bit suspicious of you coming into the organization?
Yeah. Well, an important part of it is to understand that training is never going to solve that particular problem. And it's wishful thinking to go, okay, we have a certain culture. Our managers love to just tell people what to do. It comes from the top. Maybe I'll roll out a small training program and that's going to shift the way we do things around here. And it's like, no, we actually say to people, you're probably wasting your time and money bringing us in to be part of that. You've got to think more holistically than that. So then you get into the conversation about, well, how does change happen in an organization? How do we understand cultures in an organization? And that's where things get juicy but difficult at the same time. So this is a quick aside, but the way I understand a corporate culture is influenced by a writer and a thinker called Ed Schein, which is spelled Schein. And he's got a great book called The Corporate Culture Survival Guide. And his basic insight is to say, look, a corporate culture has three levels to it, three parts to it. The top level is the artifacts. That's the stuff you notice when you go in there. So how people dress, how they are dressed, what their job titles are, what the org chart looks like, what's on the walls, whether people have cubicles or offices or whatever it might be. So there's that. Then there's the espoused values. That's what people talk about as important. So when you listen to the senior leadership conversations, the all hands conversations, what appears in the annual reports, those are all the espoused values. And then at the third level are what he calls unconscious assumptions. So that's kind of the deep behaviors that actually drive the day-to-day way that people work. And what happens is if you get all three of those in alignment, you have a really strong culture. But more typically, you have these kind of out of alignment. And in particular, you often have the top two out of alignment with the final one, the deep assumptions. So you have, for instance, a CEO who goes, our people are number one and they're individuals and awesome. And there's posters of that up on the wall, and you walk into the foyer and there's photos of every single person in the company, and you're like, this is amazing. Look at them celebrating the individual and autonomy and self-sufficiency. But then you find the way of management is we tell people what to do and we expect them to follow their orders, and we don't tolerate dissent. And that's when you find that what actually happens is out of sync with the espoused values and the artifacts. So this is a very long answer to your question, but to come back to your question about, so what happens when you move to a corporate culture and they're not as up for it? You've really got to start thinking about, well, what's happening in this culture, and how important actually is this? Or is this just somebody read an article recently on coaching and goes, oh, we should have that because it sounds cool? And if so, and if there's more to it than just a fad, what's going to make it important enough that people are going to actually go through the hard work of changing their behavior and therefore changing the culture to do things differently? And there's no easy answer to that, but it's a question of trying to figure out, how do we make change happen in this organization?
And in your book, you describe the best coaching question in the world for those organizations that are genuinely committed and they really want to develop that capacity in the managers, their leaders. And what is that best coaching question in the world? Because when I first read it, I went, God, that's so simple, but that's brilliant. I love that.
Right. Well, thank you. So the book's really simple. I mean, it starts off with a chapter on habit building, because we figure if there's no point in giving you knowledge if you don't know how to change your behavior as a result of that new knowledge. So habit building, a corporate culture is a collection of habits. Your individual change and the way you want to show up as a person, a manager, a leader, it's about changing your habits. And then we say, look, 7 good questions will help you be more coach-like. And James is pointing to question number 2 in the book, the best coaching question in the world. And it's very simple, and it has a great acronym. So you'll remember it just because of the acronym. The acronym is AWE. So you could say this is literally an awesome question. And AWE stands for and what else? And the reason I make the bold claim that this is the best coaching question in the world, because I know it actually sounds a bit anticlimactic when it's revealed. It's like, here it is, the best thing in the world, and what else? Oh, really, is that it? But the reason it's so powerful is twofold. The first is a person's first answer is never their only answer, and it's rarely their best answer. But most of us are so wired to move to action and advice giving that we take the first answer as the only answer and we rush on from there. We don't linger and go a little deeper. And then the second reason is a self-management tool, which is if your goal is to stay curious a little bit longer and rush to action and advice giving a little bit slower, that's how we talk about being more coach-like. If your goal is to stay curious a bit longer, and what else is about as simple and reliable a self-management tool to keep you curious as possible.
And I guess, I mean, that people kind of rushing to that answer, or people rushing to make that first suggestion, I suppose from an evolutionary standpoint, it's quite efficient.
That's a great insight.
There's a reason that happens. It's quite efficient. But what I love about it is just that kind of drilling down. And I've been on the receiving end of that, of a coach kind of doing that, and it's a little bit uncomfortable. And because you do have to, because as you say, your first answer is just the knee-jerk one that you initially, the second one pushes you a little bit, and the third one is, it really kind of, and then you kind of come back round to what the initial kind of question was.
Right.
And you're coming at it from a completely different place. I'm interested, you mentioned that your role really within the organization now is to kind of go out there and develop new ideas and to think those thoughts. But where do you go? How do you ensure that you're constantly kind of developing those new ideas, and where do you go for inspiration?
Well, I mean, I'm a reader, and my wife and I met. She was doing a PhD in literature. I was doing a master's degree in literature. I'm a writer, but I'm a huge reader as well. My wife's a librarian also by training, so I read eclectically. I read kids literature, young adult literature, business books, science books. I read quite broadly there. But what I've found is, and I'm sure you've heard this before, things get interesting when I actually have a real problem to solve. So I'll give you a real life example. So at the moment, with the success of the book, we've tried to expand or shift our objective as a company. You introduced this as helping people and organizations do less good work and more great work, which is a nice way of putting it. But we're really thinking now about how do we help all managers to be better coaches? So what that means is okay, so now we need to find different ways of reaching different people, because not everybody can afford to bring us in and run a classroom program. So I'm like, okay, so I want to develop an online program. Now, here's the thing. I think most online programs are terrible. Yeah. I mean, they're boring. They're non-structured. It's easier to produce than ever because it's easy enough to shoot a video, and you've got great little kind of platforms you can upload videos to. But now you have a collection of videos, and you don't really deal with the human experience of how do I learn? How do I keep practicing? How do I stick with it when things get hard? How do I drive a sense of engagement and autonomy in that? All the challenges that, as they call them, MOOCs, massive open enrollment, what are courses, I guess.
Yep.
They have 8 billion people sign up, and then less than 1% actually finish the entire program. So for the last 2 months, I've been mulling over what does it mean to shape a really good online course, and interesting stuff starts to show up. I meet somebody at a conference, and I hear about a technology he's developing to help build learning circles. And I'm like, that would be cool. So he and I have a meal together, and we get into that conversation about what learning circles are and how they might work to drive a sense of accountability and connection in the programs. I start reading around different teaching styles and different kind of channels in which people teach. I start researching. So what are the really popular YouTube videos and why? Why is that video?
Apart from the cat ones, of course.
Apart from the cat ones, but there's all these like learning videos, which are not targeted at old people like me, but targeted at 16, 18, 20-year-olds, which are massive. So what are they doing that really works? And how do I start learning from that? So, that whole saying that if you don't know what your harbor is, every wind is the right one. Once you have a direction, once you have a challenge, then you can say, so how do I get stimulated and provoked around solving this challenge?
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I come from that background of online courses and creating online programs, membership programs, and online courses. And I think it's so often, as you say, it's because a lot of it is seen as easy. It's like learning guitar. It's easy to play the first 3 chords. And right. You can kind of get away with a lot of stuff from there, but that's just a start. And what seems so few people look to do, and I would actually put many universities in this as well. Some of the best courses I'm seeing now are not MOOC courses, but mock courses, massive online courses, as opposed to massive open online courses. The ones that are being created by corporations, by companies, as opposed
right.
to institutions. And one of the things that they're doing is that they're really investing in instructional design. And really thinking deeply. This cannot just be a collection of videos, or what some of the universities did, which they just essentially took the lecture format of an hour-long lecture and try and put it into an online course.
Like, kill me now.
Yeah, exactly.
I fell asleep in the live versions of those. How am I not going to fall asleep in the video version of those? I'm just going to get distracted.
But it's great. I mean, I see obviously companies like yours. I know IDEO are doing a similar thing as well, because they're seeing that change. A lot of people can't afford companies, like most companies can't afford companies like that, and they're an incredible design firm. So it's like, how can we teach the things that we know so as many organizations as possible can benefit from this, and we can just spread the learning. So that's great. I'm so glad that you're kind of going at it from really thinking deeply about the instruction design side. You mentioned your book earlier that it's self-published. So coming up for 250,000 books self-published. Was the self-publish option, was that the route you decided right from the start, or how did that come about?
Well, I'll tell you, for people who want to really dig into how we did this, I published an article about a month ago called How I Sold 180,000 Copies of My Book and Doubled the Revenue of My Company, or something like that. It's on a website called Growth Lab. And if you Google that, you'll see quite a long article about all the marketing I did and all the kind of thinking behind it. But the short story, James, is that I spent 3 or 4 years pitching this book to my publisher. Now, I had a previous book called Do More Great Work published, and it got picked up by a New York publisher, which is super exciting. And it got published, and it did quite well. It's like close to 100,000 copies sold. And so I was like, oh, this is great. They're going to love this next book. And I just could not get them to bite. And it was quite dispiriting, because I honestly got a little bit lost as to what I was trying to do. In the end, I was trying to get them to say yes. So I was writing versions of the book I thought they wanted, even though they didn't know what type of book they really wanted. And it all got a bit confusing. And finally, I got to a point where I went, okay, this is getting silly now. I've got to call them on this. And effectively, I said, look, okay, here it is. Here's the idea for the book. It's either a yes or a no. You can't say maybe, go and try again. It's like you're either in or you're not in. And I thought they'd be in, because I'd been a successful author for them. But they said, no, we're not interested in that. So after a few days of kind of licking my wounds and moaning and about it, I then kind of figured out what my choices were, which is, okay, do I find another publisher? And, I've been around long enough, and I know enough people that I could probably get an introduction to somebody and find a way of getting them to buy the book. Or do I self-publish it? And it was honestly just the thought of having to wait another 1.5 years before this book came out, the book that I've been trying to write for 3 or 4 years, was what made me go, okay, I'm going to self-publish this, because I just want to get this book out into the world. I think I know what it is now. And once that decision got made, boy, it just went so well. I just found a brilliant editor, a brilliant designer, a brilliant kind of consultancy that kind of managed the production process for us. And And it felt like, honestly, everything we touched turned to gold for the rest of that process. The launch went well, and then it's just picked up and taken off since then.
And I'm guessing, I mean, you had that initial thing with the 180,000 copies, but someone said I was listening to an author the other day. So what a lot of people do forget is that you can have sudden hits with certain books that come out, but then they just drop off a ledge. But he said the real trick is if you can have that success, and the book is such quality that it goes on for years and years and years and year to sell. And it sounds like, I mean, I was looking through some of the reviews earlier of your book, and I just like on Amazon, I think alone it was 600, 4-5 star reviews on it as well. And people, I always look for people feeling quite strong emotions on things, and there's lots of really strong emotions, which is kind of what you want.
It's awesome, isn't it? It's so flattering to read the reviews. Of course, it's what you hope, but you're not sure because I mean, you're like it's a hard slog to write a book. It's difficult. People ask me regularly, I want to write a book, and I often say, are you sure you really want to write a book? Because I am really for you figuring out what your voice is in this world and what you want to put out in the world and what you want to stand for. But a book is just a channel. It's not the only way to get that content out in the world. I mean, look what James is doing with the podcast. It's brilliant. What he's doing with an online conference on speaking, brilliant. What is it? You were saying before, and you got 5,000 or 6,000 people signed up for the online conference.
Yeah, I think it's just it's finding your thing, how you want the modality in which you want to kind of get your ideas and your message across.
Right, and so most books are never going to sell 5,000 copies. Most books are lucky if they sell 1,000 copies. So you could say that in a much faster way, you've reached and influenced many more people than you would have then if you'd written a book.
And for me, it's more, and I suppose this kind of goes back to the kind of person, the personality that you are as well. For some people, I know that they love the whole book writing process. They love that. For other people, they love being up on the stages. That's their thing. Exactly. Because anything that detracts from that means that they're not up on a stage they're not interested as well. And then other people that kind of want that more, people great seminar leaders of the world, that people that built incredible seminar businesses because they love that effect, that experiential effect of teaching and learning.
Exactly. So to kind of connect to your question, because you're talking about you're hoping for a book that will connect and keep selling. I think that's right. And, for our little team, we've said we would like this book to be considered a coaching classic. So for us, we're like, in 3 years' time, when somebody says, what's a good book on coaching? We want to be one of the 2 books that are mentioned. And, one of our goals, for instance, is to have more than 1,000 reviews on Amazon, because we think that's one of those little markers of, well, this is a classic, because look, 1,000 reviews on Amazon. But what that means is the book came out on February the 29th, 2016. We have been marketing it since then and since before then. So appearing on this podcast, obviously I want to do it because James is a cool guy, but I'm doing it in part because this is part of the marketing for my book. And this is 14, 15, 16 months after the book came out. Exactly. And part is because I'm like, I want this book to just keep growing, to keep burning, to keep ticking along, because the typical model in the publishing world is you kill yourself for the first 6 weeks for the launch. You hope it hits a mystical list, New York Times, which it almost certainly will not do. And then you hope it all goes well after that because you're exhausted. And we got clear quite early on that we were playing a longer game, not 6 weeks, but 3 years. So how do we market this book for 3 to 5 years so that everybody who's interested in coaching just keeps bumping into this book?
And that's a great, the 3-year marketing plan. I love that. And it also reminds me, Brian Tracy was talking to an event recently to some friends of mine that were at, some fellow speakers, and he actually releases a book every 3 months. And his rationale for doing that is because he said that a lot of the publishers now, they've got such a short attention span, when it comes to releases. They're only thinking in quarters. They just think in quarters. So that's fine. Okay, I'll write a book every quarter. That was his approach, and that's that suits his personality and what he's about, because he has lots of different interests and different areas of his business as well. But what you said is just as valid, and obviously very kind of successful in doing it. In this journey, this creative journey you've had, can you point to one key aha moment or light bulb moment where you went, okay, this is the direction I want to be going with, or this is a key distinction I made that really made all the difference for you?
Well, I can tell you what it is in retrospect, and this is more kind of from the business perspective, which is we have found every time we've chosen to focus, we've had more success. So here's how we talk about our business now. We're a training company. We teach 10-minute coaching so your managers can build stronger teams and get better results. And you can see that is a very clear articulation of what we do and the benefit for doing it. And it means that people either want to talk to us or they don't want to talk to us. We don't do strategy, we don't do leadership, we don't do those kind of broad umbrella topics. We teach 10-minute coaching, practical coaching skills for busy managers. And every time, and it takes a degree of courage to do that, because I know more than just coaching. I know a bunch of stuff. And when somebody calls up and goes, hey, I looked in your website, it doesn't look like you do team building, but we're looking for somebody to do team building. I'm like, I could whip up a team building thing. That's not too hard. But that having that focus has meant we go no to that, so we can say yes to the stuff where we can really make a difference, where we are really different, where we want to build our reputation. So there's been endless people saying, focus, Michael. My good friend Anton, when I first started the company and I was kind of doing a little bit of everything, he's like, focus, my friend, focus. And I'm like, yeah, you don't understand, Anton. I'm a creative spirit. I'm wild at heart. Don't tie me in. Don't fence me in, man. And he's kind of rolled his eyes and carried on. And 4 years ago, I went to a conference where a woman was talking about small businesses, and there was a bunch of us in the room, and she went, I've actually looked at many of your websites, and I can say to all of you, you're all under $5 million in revenue. You need to sell fewer things to fewer sectors and fewer geographies. I was like, and as they say, when the student's ready, the teacher appears. So I was ready to hear that. So now we only market in Toronto and New York and Boston and then Canada. So we have 4 areas in which we deliberately, actively market our programs. And again, that's one of those moments where I'm like, that feels scary, because, I can send an email to a bunch of people in California or in the UK or wherever. I've lived in the UK. I've lived in Australia. Why wouldn't I try and get a foothold in those places as well? But what this allows us to do is, like, we want to be, anytime somebody in Toronto says we need to think about coach training, I want somebody in the room to go, well, we should check in with Box of Crayons, because I've heard about them. And everybody goes, oh yeah, I've heard about Box of Crayons. So that focus is really a key part of how we've succeeded.
So I can hear, and I think it sounds that you said this at the start as well. With that focus, you felt that creatively that was going to hem you in too much. You said, I've got all these other interests, and I want to do this, and I want to do this. So how did you square that circle?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So partly it's because my role has changed and evolved. So I do different things in the company now than I did when I started. And so that learning how to manage a bigger team and be a CEO and do stuff is part of what keeps me fresh. But it's probably not enough. And so later on in the year, we're going to launch a separate website, michaelbungaystanier.com. And effectively, that's my sandpit. I'm going to get out there and I can do whatever little projects I want. Because as we become more courageous to be more focused about Box of Crayons, it's harder and harder for me to have little side projects to kind of keep my interest up. So, 4 or 5 years ago, I did actually a bit like the speaker conference you're doing. I did an online program called the Great Work MBA. We had, I think, 30 speakers over a week. It was just this massive. I had no idea how large an effort it was to build this up. We had 10,000 people sign up to be participants. It was really a fantastic, epic experience. And I loved doing it. It really didn't help the business. It wasn't that smart or that strategic for the business, but it was just a fun thing for me to kind of keep interested. Now, as our company gets bigger and more people rely on us having and holding our focus, I can't do that anymore. So that's why we're launching a new website where I can go off and blow things up without taking down the company with it.
And let's talk about online resource. You were talking about you kind of heavily getting involved in online courses and building and apps and building those things out. Do you have an online resource or a tool or a mobile app that you find really useful for the work that you do?
Well, so the one I use the most is a project management tool called Asana, Asana. And what it's been is, this is kind of very tactical, but what we found is as our team grew at Box of Crayons, we were all dying under the internal exchange of emails. We just, we had inboxes stretching to Timbuktu because we were all emailing each other all the time about everything. And what Asana does is it's a project management tool. It's really light, it's elegant, and it means that conversations about tasks that we're working on live within Asana as a kind of nested chat type of thing that goes on, rather than clutters up my inbox. So it's very practical. There are other alternatives to Asana, but Asana really works well for us as a team.
And if you could recommend just one book and also one record, one album to our listeners, what would they be?
Yeah. I love Bill Bryson. He's a travel writer, American, lived in England for quite a while, traveled to Australia, other places. Any of his travel books are basically screechingly funny. But he wrote a book called A Short History of Nearly Everything, which is actually trying to make science interesting and understandable. He's like, science is cool, but we've all been kind of, battered by it in high school, and we've kind of like, oh, not physics, not chemistry. And honestly, it is a book that just blows your head off, because he just shows you some of the breakthroughs, some of the amazing things about what has to happen to help us live on this planet. So I think this is a book that is both, it'll make you smarter and you will laugh out loud, and he's a beautiful writer. So there's my book. And as for my album, honestly, I love Bob Dylan. So because, I can actually, on my little ukulele, I can play Bob Dylan songs. And when I sing, I don't sound terrible, because Bob Dylan is a terrible singer. So I'm like, I'm kind of almost as bad as Bob Dylan. And Blood on the Tracks is probably the classic album. It's the first Bob Dylan album that I heard, and it is truly one of his masterpieces.
Isn't it? You mentioned Bob Dylan. A friend of mine works with Bob Dylan and his manager, and he said he's one of these rare artists. He never looks back. He's got no interest whatsoever in his back catalogue. Never looks
amazing.
back, and he's always looking forward. What is the next thing? What is the next thing?
I love that.
Yeah,
Jack White's a bit like that as well. He's just. Jack White is like the new Bob Dylan in a couple of ways. One is he's very conscious about creating a enigmatic icon. So we know what Jack White looks like. Some of it, he's in red, always in blue, always in yellow. It's just like Dylan. Dylan's face appears on every album cover, and it's always different. And then you hear Dylan tell his stories about who he is, and you're like, how much of this are you just making up? It sounds like most of it. And Jack White's the same. So I love how they both are very conscious about their brand, but at the same time masterfully enigmatic about that, and constantly hungry for what's the next project.
Absolutely. And Michael, final question for you. Let's imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So you've got all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you. You know no one. You've got to restart. What would you do? How would you restart?
I would get a job because I think that it's really hard to build something new and different and creative when you don't have a degree of security. And I would find a job best job I could that paid me enough money. And then I would start figuring out stuff as a side hustle on the side as to what I could do, because I often think that people who've had a degree of success go, oh, I figured out how to be successful. I just do that again because it worked for me the first time. And I think that's called, there's a name for it. It's called survivor bias, which is, what I did must work because I survived. I know that if I went, okay, I'm just going to write another book and I'm going to launch it just like I did the coaching habit, because, man, that was brilliant. That's like doubled my business, sold, 250,000 copies. But the second time it's not going to take off. It's going to sell 1,000 copies or 5,000 copies if I'm lucky. So I get a job and then I start experimenting.
Well, Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. We're going to have all the links here. People go to jamestaylor.me and just look for Michael Bungay Stanier, and you're going to have all the links that we've been speaking about as well, including the new book as well. Michael, thank you so much for coming on. I look forward to maybe catching up with you soon, maybe seeing you speaking on a stage or at some event somewhere in the world. Thanks for joining us today.
James, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.